Hey everyone and welcome back to the channel. This is Dave and today we'll be taking a look at the third generation iPod, or the iPod Classic 3 as some people call it. I bought this from eBay a couple of weeks ago and it was only $20, but before we get into how I managed to grab it for such a low price, I would highly appreciate it if you guys took a second to subscribe to my channel. It's completely free and it helps out enormously since I'm just starting out and I'm very new at this. So if you enjoy the content, feel free to drop a like and subscribe, and thank you so much. But back to the iPod. As I said, I got this for just $20. Seriously. They usually go for around $100 or more if they're in decent condition. But the seller stated that this iPod was being sold as broken and or for spare parts. They said that it doesn't show any signs of life, and I asked if they tried to charge it. And they said, yep, we plugged it in for a few hours and nothing happened. Now, the true iPod nerds among you might know where this is heading. And just as I expected, this is what happened. So if you take a standard 30-pin to USB charging cable, and let's say we plug it into a, this is a genuine Apple charger, yeah? So let's just plug it in. I have my handy IKEA extension cord right here. Shout out to IKEA. And let's see what happens when I try to plug this in. The hard drive spins up because, yeah, it still has some battery because I did manage to charge it, but as you can see, absolutely nothing happens. So this is probably what the seller did as well. But as you can see, this iPod is very picky when it comes to charging, and it only charges using FireWire. So going back to the chargers, if we take another cable, which is actually a 30-pin to FireWire, yep, that old FireWire connector, and if we take a genuine Apple FireWire charger, plug this in into the extension cord, and let's see what happens when I plug this into the iPod. There you go. It charges perfectly and completely normal. Oh, you can also charge it if you still have one of these bad boys kicking around. A 2006 MacBook or 2008 also had FireWire, I think. So yeah, you can also charge it using this, but I'm not sure if anyone still uses these. I have one from my collection, and yeah, this also charges the iPod just fine. So I actually charged this iPod a few times in the past week, and it lasts for about 4 hours on a charge, which is very impressive. Because one, I opened this up earlier and it still uses the original battery, which is 22 years old. And two, because Apple originally quoted about 8 hours of battery life when new, but it never got up to that since it was extremely power hungry. Early reviews mentioned that this iPod would only get around 6 hours of battery life even when brand new. So having it last for over 4 hours 2 decades later is nothing short of impressive, to be honest. This iPod was extremely futuristic at the time, having no physical buttons. These 4 buttons at the top were actually capacitive, solid state, so they wouldn't physically move. I mean, they would click because I turned on the clicker, but they don't move or they don't make any sound. Like, for example, I have an iPod 4th generation here, and you can clearly hear the clicks. These buttons actually click in, they move physically. Even the center button doesn't move. It senses when you press it, but as I said, it doesn't move. So these are all capacitive buttons, they don't move at all. The only button on this iPod was actually the hold switch, so yeah. Speaking of these 4 buttons on the top, they're actually quite controversial, since the location wasn't very accessible with your thumb, and it wasn't all that intuitive, especially since people were used to having them on the click wheel. So with the next generation, Apple actually returned these buttons to the click wheel. So if you see, we have menu, back and next, and the play pause button. So yeah, it was much easier to have them at hand right on the click wheel than having them as separate buttons. Now, they were also backlit, so you can actually see them while using the iPod in the dark or at night, which again was very impressive for the time. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the only iPod that ever shipped with backlit buttons. Oh, and remember the 30-pin connector that we used with all of our older iPhones, including the first iPhone and up until the iPhone 4S? Yes, that connector. I have an iPhone 4 here or something. I always get it wrong. See, that was one of the downsides of 30-pin. But yeah, back to the 30-pin connector. This was actually the first device to ever use the 30-pin connector. Apple actually introduced this connector with this exact iPod. So yeah, it's quite special in that sense. And this is exactly why the iPod was so picky when it came to charging and syncing, because as I said, it was the first device to ever use it. So in order to charge it, you actually had to use a 30-pin to FireWire cable like I showed you, and you had no other alternatives. For syncing, you could either use the same FireWire cable or you could use a 30-pin to USB cable. But the problem was that if the battery was very weak in the iPod and you had a lot of songs to sync over, it could just die during the sync since it wouldn't pull any power from the cable. Yeah, more complicated times back in 2003. But let's have a look at the iPod software. It came preloaded with a bunch of songs. Well, not all of them, of course, the one that I bought off of eBay. It came preloaded with about 2,000 songs if I'm not mistaken, but let's just quickly have a look. And yeah, 2,194 songs, which took up over 12 gigs of the available 20 gigabytes. But what happens if we try to shuffle all of these songs? Let's just have a look. So if you click on shuffle songs, you can actually hear the hard drive spinning up, and after a few seconds, yeah, it simply just shuffles the entire 2,000 songs, which is pretty cool. Oh, and speaking of the hard drive, I also ran a test for it, and yeah, it showed no bad or reallocated sectors, which is very cool. The sound quality of this iPod was also very, very good. It had 2 DACs, 2 ADCs, an integrated headphone driver, a high-pass filter, and if all of that don't mean anything to you, just know that it sounded fantastic. Even today, it is considered to be one of the best sounding iPods ever, much better than the later ones, like this 5th generation, for example, which also sounded great, but not that great. But back to the iPod, you also had some extras. So for example, you had a clock, you had contacts which you could sync over from your computer. You also had a calendar, notes, and you also had games because yeah, everyone liked their iPod games. My favorite one was actually Solitaire, and I actually played this game for like an hour while testing the iPod. And yeah, well, it's not too impressive today. Keep in mind, this was 2003. Windows XP was still fresh, and the newest release of OS X was 10.3 or Panther, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, having Solitaire on your portable device 22 years ago was actually pretty cool. You also had Music Quiz, which was quite an interesting app. It would take a random song from your library and you had a few options to choose from, and you had to guess which song it was playing. And of course, you had a time limit. You also had Parachute, which was a classic tower shooting game. You could shoot helicopters and soldiers. Yeah, a classic shoot 'em up game. And you also had Brick, which is of course the most classic and well-known iPod game. Everyone used to play this and everyone loved it. When it comes to price, this iPod was very expensive at the time. It was one of the most expensive iPods ever released, with the base model starting at $299 for 10 gigabytes and the most expensive one being $499 for 30 gigabytes. Adjusted for inflation, it's over $870 in today's money. So yeah, I actually have the mid-tier 20 gigabyte model that was $399. Oh, and shout out to Arlid Berglund, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I'm assuming that's the first owner of this iPod, and yeah, they actually engraved their name on the back of the iPod, which was a free option from Apple. Now, given that this iPod was only $20 off of eBay, I'm extremely happy with my purchase. And this could be a good tip for you as well. If you have a FireWire charger, have a look on eBay for broken 3rd gens. Chances are the seller simply doesn't have a FireWire charger and the iPod is actually completely fine. Now, comparing this iPod to some of the later generations, we have the iPod 3, of course, we have the iPod 4th generation monochrome, we have the iPod 5th generation with video, and we have the iPod 6th generation, or the iPod Classic as Apple called it. Now, you see that this iPod was actually the only one that had the buttons on top, and all of the later iPods integrated those buttons into the click wheel because it was much easier to use this way and it was much more convenient. Now, comparing it to these other iPods, sadly I don't have a 1st or 2nd generation, but honestly this iPod feels so much more, I don't know, more substantial, more premium, I would say. I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, it feels a bit better in the hands compared to these newer ones. So yeah, this was the third generation iPod from 2003. Let me know if you ever had one of these, and if you liked it, if you disliked it. And of course, let me know which one of these you preferred, and which one of these iPods you actually use or used. Let me know in the comments down below, and as always, thank you so much for watching and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.